Imagine, for a moment, that you are standing in an open grave. The smell of freshly turned earth fills your nose. Above you, a priest towers with a shovel in one hand and a Bible in the other. He is not burying a corpse, he is burying you. As he throws a handful of dirt into your face, he recites the Separatio Leprosorum, the Mass of Separation. You are dead to the world, he chants in a somber monotone, and alive only to God. This was the brutal, mandatory living funeral for lepers in the 12th century, a legal decree that stripped a human being of their rights, their family, and their life. But in 1174, one boy cheated this ritual. Instead of a grave, they gave him a kingdom. Instead of a wooden clapper to warn people of his unclean presence, they gave him a sword. This is the story of King Baldwin IV, the leper king who defied biology, logic, and the most powerful army in the East. But before he could fight the legendary Saladin, he had to fight the silence of his own body. Before we unearth this forgotten history, please like and subscribe to support our journey into the past. The nightmare did not begin on a battlefield, it began in a playground. The year is 1170. In the royal courtyard of Jerusalem, a group of young noble boys are playing a rough game, digging their sharp fingernails into each other's arms to test their toughness. It is a game of grimaces and cries, as boys pull away and rub their bruised skin. But William of Tyre, the royal tutor, notices one boy who isn't reacting. Prince Baldwin, 9 years old, is laughing. He thinks he is winning. William steps in, grabbing the prince's right arm. He drives his fingernails deep into the flesh, harder than any playmate would dare. The skin turns white, then angry red. The boy looks at him, confused, and utters 3 words that spell catastrophe: "I feel nothing." William immediately recognizes the symptoms of lepra. In the brutal Middle Ages, this diagnosis was a one-way ticket to social exile. However, the High Court made a terrifying choice. They would hide the diagnosis to protect the line of succession. When King Amalric died 4 years later, the shield of secrecy was shattered. Baldwin was 13 when the heavy gold crown settled on his head in the Holy Sepulchre. The court saw him merely as a placeholder king, expecting him to rot away in a back room while they carved up the kingdom. They assumed a boy who could not feel his own hand could not possibly hold a sword. They were dead wrong. Baldwin refused to hide. He refused to retire. He began a brutal regimen of physical training. If he could not feel the reins of a horse with his hands, he would learn to steer with his knees. If he could not grip a sword with strength, he would have it locked to his arm. He forced his decaying body to obey his iron will because he knew that Saladin, the great unifier of the Saracen forces, was rising in the east. Saladin smelled blood, convinced that conquering a kingdom led by a sick child would be the easiest victory of his life. By 1176, the regency ended, and Baldwin turned 15. To his enemies, he was a walking corpse. To his people, he was a miracle. His first act was not to call for doctors, but for his horse. Riding a war horse requires immense grip strength to control 1,000 pounds of armored muscle, yet Baldwin was losing sensation in his hands. He trained his legs to become vices of iron, clamping onto the beast's flanks to signal movement. He turned his own body into a rigid extension of his military equipment. While Baldwin was strapping himself to his horse, Saladin made his great mistake. He looked at the map and saw a nuisance, not a threat. He turned his back on Jerusalem to fight fellow Muslims in Aleppo, confident the sick boy would stay in bed. Baldwin saw Saladin's back turned and struck with a lightning-fast cavalry assault into the Bekaa Valley, stunning the Saracen governors and disrupting the trade routes feeding Saladin's army. The training wheels were off by 1177. Saladin, annoyed by the child biting at his heels, gathered an army of 26,000 men, Mamluks, Kurdish cavalry, and Sudanese infantry. It was a massive invasion force designed to crush the kingdom of Jerusalem in a single season. Baldwin had barely 500 knights. His advisors begged him to hide behind the walls of Jerusalem, but Baldwin knew a siege was just a slow death, much like his disease. He chose the open field. Marching his tiny force toward the coast, the pain in his deteriorating limbs must have been excruciating, as leprosy causes deep bone inflammation. Every jolt of the horse sent shockwaves through his skeleton, but he rode on toward a place called Montgassard. On November 25th, Saladin's army was spread out, confident and disorganized, believing the king was cowering in Ascalon. They were wrong. Baldwin and his 500 knights appeared on the horizon. The bishop of Bethlehem stepped forward with the true cross, and Baldwin, the boy with the rotting face, fell to his knees in the sand. He wept, begging God for salvation, a moment of raw vulnerability that steeled the hearts of his knights. They were no longer fighting for land, they were fighting for him. Baldwin mounted his horse and pointed his bandaged hand toward the enemy. The charge of the 500 knights was a catastrophic kinetic event, smashing into the disorganized Saracen lines. The shock was absolute. The cry went up, "The leper is here!" Panic spread like wildfire, and the numerical advantage of 26,000 men evaporated. Saladin himself barely escaped on a racing camel, abandoning his army to annihilation. The victory at Montgassard was a miracle, but the cost was paid in the king's flesh. The exertion accelerated his condition. By his late teens, the handsome boy was gone. The disease had dismantled his face, dissolving the cartilage of his nose and retracting his lips. He hid his face behind heavy silk veils, not to create an aura of power, but to spare his subjects the horror of his appearance. He was going blind, his eyelids paralyzed and unable to blink. Yet, as his body failed, his will hardened. He refused to abdicate, becoming a disembodied intellect governing a kingdom on the brink. However, he faced a new threat, the incompetence of his heir. With no children of his own, the kingdom would pass to his sister Sibylla's husband, Guy de Lusignan, a man Baldwin knew was a fool. In 1183, the situation became dire. Baldwin was blind, unable to use his hands or feet, and his body was covered in ulcerating sores. Saladin returned, attacking the fortress of Carrick during a royal wedding. The signal fires were lit, but Guy de Lusignan hesitated. There was only one man with the moral authority to lead. King Baldwin ordered his servants to carry him on a litter. The army of Jerusalem marched out, not led by a king on a stallion, but by a box with curtains swaying in the heat. Inside lay a dying blind man whose mere presence was a weapon. When Saladin's scouts reported that the king's litter was approaching, the Sultan ordered a retreat. He knew the morale of the Crusader army was unbreakable when the leper king was with them. He refused to fight a ghost. This was Baldwin's final act. He returned to Jerusalem a living corpse, his duty fulfilled. He died in 1185 at the age of 24, finally free from pain. He was buried near Golgotha, a king who suffered in flesh resting near where Christ suffered on the cross. But without his iron will, the kingdom collapsed. Guy de Lusignan took the throne and, in his arrogance, led the army into the waterless trap of Hattin in 1187. The army was slaughtered, the true cross was lost, and Jerusalem fell to Saladin. The Sultan, in a gesture of respect, spared the city from a massacre and left Baldwin's tomb untouched. Today, King Baldwin IV has achieved a strange digital immortality. In an age of curated perfection, he represents the ultimate triumph of spirit over a broken reality. He is the anti-victim. He teaches us a lesson in stoicism that rivals the ancients. We cannot control our bodies or our times, only our response. He showed the world that authority comes not from physical strength, but from the willingness to suffer alongside your people. When he ordered his litter into the desert, he told the world, "I am still here." Jerusalem fell, and the kingdom crumbled, but the figure of the leper king rises above the bloodshed. He remains a testament to the terrifying power of the human will. So, when you feel overwhelmed by the unfairness of life, remember the boy who felt nothing in his right arm, yet held the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders. Remember the funeral that never happened, and the face hidden behind the veil. Sometimes, the face we show the world is less important than the fire that burns behind it. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments, was the fall of Jerusalem inevitable, or could it have been saved? Keep looking for the truth behind the mask.